What I'd like to say, first of all, is I think that writing a good horror script is at least as difficult as writing a good mainstream drama. I think it's more difficult because you have to have the same rules of dramaturgy that deliver your script in horror, plus the ability to build and relieve tension and suspense and all that. So it really, to do it well, you have to do it as well as any other writing job. But it's not the simple slash 'em thing. Well, you can do that too and be successful and have shitty movies that are successful, but we'd like to think that we're responsible for good work in the horror genre, and these are great people to represent that. And so the first thing we should probably touch on would be what's happening in the current world of horror, and that's remakes and sequels. And everyone here is fairly well versed in that.
We know nothing about that.
Yes. Well, having been the minds behind many of the Saw sequels, let's start with you. How does it come to you, and what are the edicts? I know that you work closely with Peter Block and Jason Constantine.
Well, I mean, how do we get involved in it and all that business?
Yeah, and then what the process is.
Well, we got involved with the Saw project, or franchise, like, after 3, and what was going on. We had the script called The Midnight Man, and which is called The Collector, which is actually coming out in a few weeks. And so it was what we did. We sold that idea off a concept. We walked into a room to these guys who had everyone was looking for Saw when we were doing this, and we were told that when we went to the room. And so we had this idea that was like a contained horror movie that could be made for $1 million. Which everyone's looking for. And so we pitched it, and they wanted to do it, and they're going to do it themselves. But when it came to actually make the movie, they said, well, we don't quite have enough money, so we need to go halfsies with someone. And so at that point, we went out, and people read the script, and we sort of talked about the idea, and it got into the hands of Twisted Pictures, which are the people who do Saw. And this is at the same point where Lee Whannell, who wrote 1, 2, and 3, said, I'm not going to do anymore. I've killed enough people. Let's just pass the mantle. And so this script originally was thought to be perhaps the origin of Jigsaw. But
you had written it as an original screenplay.
Yeah.
Was it intended to play upon the success of Saw?
Only elementally, in that we didn't want to mimic Saw so much as we wanted to mimic something like Manhunter. But Manhunter had a brilliant broad canvas, and you had private jets and a little. So how can you sustain that tone in a home, in a bar, in a car, and whatnot, and then spice it up with some of the more energized bloodletting that was becoming popular, if the two would balance.
Well, the original concept, though, ironically, because I was telling them earlier, I was cleaning out my garage today, and so I saw all my old film school bad idea scripts and stuff like that. I'm like, oh wow, that was horrible. But I found this one document, and it was one page, and it was this short film that Marcus and I wanted to do. It was called The Thief. Of course, the Michael Mann inspiration, but its subtitle was "A Thief Breaks Into the Home of Michael Myers," and so that was sort of like the basis for this idea. And so and this is years before Saw. So it just coincidentally, though, we had elements that were similar to the Saw franchise, and so naturally the producers were looking for new writers, and at that time non-guild writers they were looking for various reasons. Everyone will learn as they progress in their career. And so that was
no money.
Yeah. So that's how we got the gig, and so we were sort of thrust into it. Of you guys know the franchise, you like the franchise, sure, and you can. Of course you do. Now we do, and so that was our introduction. It was based off of that script, and so. we had to really learn the I mean, of course we'd seen the movies, but we really had to learn the franchise, and then based on that, that's how we sort of got into it.
Well, we'll get more into the process of what that means and how much of the creative process is your own and how much it's guided by the studio. But let's talk about the remake idea. You guys have written the remake of...
I'll jump in a little bit about this.
Yeah, but I actually did publicity on the original Poltergeist and did the documentary with... I haven't seen the movie yet, so watch your step. But, and so I was around the production and saw all of that going on and all the dynamic between Tobe Hooper and Steven Spielberg and all of that stuff, and it was a fascinating situation. And it was the last movie that Spielberg did that he did not have any control over what happened to in the future, sequels and the like. So this process obviously did not involve Steven. So can you give us a little bit of background on how this came together?
I just want to talk just real quickly about remakes in general, because there's a lot of criticism about remakes, and we're in a very weird time right now with the economy, and studios, I feel, and just my experience, are scared to pull the trigger on things. They're spending $40, $50, $60, $70 million on making the movie, and then an added $50 million in advertising the movie. So they're putting a lot of money up. And we wrote a ghost story that we sold to Wes Craven about 10 years ago called The Waiting. And if you were an executive at a studio, and you heard what happened at Paramount, they just got rid of a bunch of their big executives, and you had 2 scripts. And The Waiting, by the way, we love it. We think it's a great script, and we hope it gets made one day. But if you were an executive and you had to make a movie, and you had The Waiting in front of you and the Poltergeist remake in front of you, you as audience members, what would you go for? You would go for Poltergeist because it's a built-in title, and
Sorry, I had the wrong answer.
Yeah, I'd go for The Waiting, but that's where writers are finding themselves right now. We have tons of original ideas, but we're always being approached with all of these remakes, and to survive as a writer, you have to jump into the game. And we actually had an idea of a spec that we were working on, and it was an unusual idea, and we were like, well, let's just pretend like this is the Poltergeist remake and put the word Poltergeist on this and see what they think of this, and they liked it. So as a writer, you're constantly trying to navigate through this bizarre studio system and survive, and sometimes you just have to do what you have to do to get the job.
I mean, I think for me, there's probably a handful of titles that are, seminal for my movie-going experience. Poltergeist is definitely one of them. I think I saw that movie at the right age, and it had the right impact on me, and probably was one of those films that, maybe bumped me that way, where I, to the point where I, kind of ended up in the direction of the kinds of movies and scripts that I like to write today. So when you get the call, or they approach you and they say, so the studio's remaking Poltergeist and they're talking to various writers, I mean, there's a part of you where you say, maybe I shouldn't touch that one. Mm-hmm. And then there's another part of you that says, but I sure would hate it if someone else touched it and messed it up in a way. So maybe if someone is going to touch it, maybe I should touch it, and let me get in there and
or fondle it. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Gently.
And so I think there is a way in these remakes, because we are getting into the territory where they're remaking, not just kind of obscure 80s stuff, but, big classic titles that mean a lot to a lot of people. And the things that we've taken on, they mean a lot to me as well. And so I feel like for me to take on a remake, I have to come from that starting point where I respect the material and it meant something to me. I think for us, the first thing we sit down and think about is, well, what could we say about these characters that's different than what they were saying with those characters? There's something else. If the original Poltergeist said something about the American family in 1982. Well, what are we saying about the American family in today's age? And just really using that as a starting point. And we go in and we talk to these studios and these executives, and we kind of put these ideas out there. And if that's not what they're on board for, we all go our separate ways. But if they really respond to that, then I feel good that I'm able to jump into something, and I'm going to do something different with it, and that's what that's the direction that the studio is excited about as well.
Now, just a quick question: how familiar were the executives that you worked with the original Poltergeist?
Very.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Because
Very
I know that there are studio executives who all they know is the title
That's right.
of
Yeah,
something
I think
they're
we
remaking.
were lucky on that one, that we were all very aware and also aware from a respect level of maybe that's a moment we shouldn't do because maybe it feels like we're making fun of it, or I think you've got
Well,
to
they
be
loved the
hyper
movie
aware.
as well as knew the original movie as well.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
that's great. So, well, what about let's get to the specifics. What was that first creative meeting like at Lionsgate with Peter and Jason? There'd been 3 Saw movies. How do you come in on number 4 and say, okay, this is how we can keep it fresh? Because each time it does come out and it's a hit.
This is what's great about their process, is that they did create a Bible. And they created a Bible that has very strict rules to it and also has an ending. And so the gist of it is it's not always about being left in a lurch and creating new questions. 3 could have done that, but they were very clever about prearranging elements to get to this end. And it has a wonderful device in it, regardless of anyone's feelings on the level of violence or elements that went into the film. It's trapping someone in a room with their worst vice and seeing if they can survive it. I think it's wonderful. It's usually just that simple idea that is played and played and played, and the type of person you want. I mean, I don't know. We've been dying to skin a racist.
We all have.
Yeah.
But that movie, like the Saw movies, are they're so serialized that we inherited a lot of baggage, and it was a movie where you killed off the 2 villains. So now we're supposed to pick up the pieces from that one, and there's certainly pieces left for us to do. One thing that was helpful, though, that it did have Darren Bousman, who did 2 and 3, and he came back, so he had already had a lot of ideas, and they all have a lot of ideas because Lionsgate has such a vested interest in it because it's so profitable. So it was intimidating in that when we walked into the room for the first meeting, we had the next 3 films charted out, and we did this thing where we learned from a guy named Brian Levant, who directed Snow Dogs, and he
Beethoven.
Yes. And are we there yet? And so he I don't know if you guys use this, but this is sometimes good for pitching. These giant Post-it notes, and there's literally it's a Post-it note, like yellow Post-it notes, but it's giant. It's it's like 3 feet by 3 feet, and you actually just put down the major beats on it, and it's very helpful in taking you through the pitch. So we came in very sort of organized and said, here are the next 3 movies, blah blah blah, and that definitely helped sort of break the ice because it showed that
Now, was this your pitch, or was this the first creative meeting you had once you got the job?
We never pitched.
If I may, I wanted to tell one thing is, we'd had a little experience, everyone that goes up for something is probably in competition with someone else, but the rules were very clear. There were 3 other writers, teams, or individuals writing scripts called Saw Part 4. Wow. And only upon their completion would one be selected to actually be filmed. And I
didn't cherry pick scenes from the different ones?
No, actually, that was nice. There were, an element or 2 maybe here or there, or a line or something, fine, but that, I think, raised our game, because it was like, all right, you think we're working hard? Someone out there is also burning the midnight oil, the 1 a.m. oil, 2 a.m., 6 a.m. oil, because this is a nice opportunity to scare people. And that was cool. I liked that terror.
One thing about that is good about sequels is that you do sort of already have most of the groundwork for a character has already been established for the most part. Regardless if you think there is no character development in Saw, but so you have these set up characters, so you don't need to do a lot of the legwork that you generally have to do. So it is like writing for a TV in a sense that we're trying to mimic Lee Whannell's voice, and so it was. If you're able to do that, and if you have any kind of experience in TV, it is somewhat easier perhaps because that's already set up, and so you're just playing by the rules, and so we were able to do that pretty well. So that was definitely a learning experience, but it was something that it was helpful, I think, in coming up with new ideas.
Well, we're going to get to questions a little bit later, but okay, go ahead, sure.
Not to be practical or anything, but the 3 teams that we're working on.
Oh, wait a minute. No, because we're gonna do it later. Because jot this down, because we're gonna have microphones because we're taping this whole thing, so we need to do it at the end. I'm getting the word from over there, but I promise yours will be the first one. But let's talk about the pitching process, because the original scripts that you guys have sold, and yours were contest winners. With Feast, but let's talk about the knowing and how important the pitch is, or if it's a matter of just a good script got on somebody's desk that they got excited about.
Students, film students. I don't know if your universities have classes in pitching. You are going to be pitching your ass off. I mean, pitching is the most important thing that there is, and it's the thing I hate the most. I loathe it. I hate it because you're just constantly trying to sell yourself, and I always get real sick right before every pitch. I've been sick in every studio across Hollywood. But
Juliet's vomit is everywhere. It's ubiquitous.
You have to pitch, and not only do you have to pitch to get the job, you have to pitch while you have the job, because you have to. A lot of times when you're in the middle of the writing process, you're also having to pitch what you're going to be doing with the third act. If the third act didn't work, or if the studio is uncomfortable with the third act, it's a constant process of talking and talking. We talk more, we pitch more than we write, like 80% more, right? I mean, it's pitching 80%, writing 20%. But he likes it more than me, and you can talk a little more about
Yeah, I think what Mick is asking about our original scripts. I really, where we kind of started out, I was working in special effects. I was a production coordinator at Stan Winston Studios. I'd done 25 films there. Had actually met Mick a number of times when he came through, and Juliet and I were dating, and we were writing together, and we had that moment where we realized we needed to write that script that was going to start to make something happen for us, because we were kind of messing around with this, that, and the other, and we would always come back to we had written some sci-fi things, and I tried a couple comedy things. But when we would talk about the movies that we loved and that we were really passionate about, it always came back to the horror films that really, really scared us when we were kids. And so,
Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah, Rosemary's Baby and The Shining and The Exorcist and Poltergeist, and so we said, well, then that's it. That's what we're going to commit to. We're going to write the scary script, and that's going to be our big calling card script that goes out there, because at that moment we didn't have anything. We didn't have an agent, we didn't have a manager, we didn't have anyone who was going to read our stuff. So I think when we decided that we wanted to write a horror film, we wanted to write something scary, we kind of went back to that psychological horror era, because we thought, well, let's write something that feels contained, but that actors would want to do and directors would want to do. And we really put everything we had into that. And that was kind of, I felt, looking back, I felt like that was a smart decision. And I'm glad that was our calling card script that got us out there and got us our first round of meetings and our first managers and everything, because I felt like I could control the mood and the tone and what was happening on the page. I mean, if you're going to write a comedy script, you hope that someone reads it and they're laughing, and if you're going to write a horror script, you hope someone reads it and their reaction is, wow, that was really creepy, or that I got really freaked out reading that script. And you know if that's working or not when you kind of slip it to your friends as test reactions. So from there, that script, even though it was our calling card script, it never sold. But then we wrote another one and decided to kind of stick with what was working for us, and that was a script that got Wes Craven's attention. It was the first script we optioned, and again we kind of went back to basics of psychological horror and taking all these supernatural elements that are out there, whether you're writing zombies or ghosts or vampires or the killer, and just trying to make it as much of a psychological horror movie as possible.
And at that point, we hadn't pitched anything. And what happened with the first time we really had to pitch was somebody read our script, The Waiting. Well, Sam Raimi's people read The Waiting and really liked it. And this is before we were in the union, and we were really, really, really cheap and desperate. And they had a script called Boogeyman that needed a major rewrite. And so they had us come in and pitch to Sam and his people. That was a very nerve-wracking first pitch, Sam Raimi.
A sweet,
I know,
funny guy.
He was
and
awesome.
Not intimidating,
Not at
except
all.
the idea of him is
The idea, because it was when he was doing Spider-Man too, right?
Yeah.
So all the Spider-Man shit was everywhere, and it was like, oh my God.
Did he call you both buddy?
Yeah.
And he offered me a cheeseburger, so I was immediately...
Lots of buddy.
Yeah. But so our first pitch was really pitching him how we would change the script and what we would do for the rewrite job. So,
and I think pitching horror films, like writing them, and the reaction that you want to have in the room. You want people thinking certain moments are creepy. And I remember when we were pitching to Sam, because there was a thought of, we can either kind of do this quickie 10-day rewrite and get this much done, or do maybe a 25-day rewrite and get this much done. So what our pitch is let's try to go pitch them on all the cool stuff that we can get done in 25 days, but that we can't get done in 10 days. So we really wanted to go in and have those 5 key moments that were really gonna, feel like great horror moments that you're really gonna want in this film. And I remember we were pitching one sequence in particular, and Sam Raimi just kind of looked at us, and it was just a particularly gruesome point. And he said, What is wrong with the two of you? Something happened to the two of you in your child. And that's when I knew, again, that's when I knew it was working in the room. So pitching horror, you want to get that reaction where it's going to work on the screen and an audience is going to respond. In
Well,
the same
Patrick,
way.
Job. They got the job.
Yeah, there you
First
go.
pitch and you got the job.
Amazing.
We did not get the first job. off our
Okay, well,
pitch.
Patrick and Marcus, you guys had a very unique entry into the business.
Yeah, yours was televised.
There were
saw every gruesome moment.
there were 2 previous versions of Project Greenlight that were on HBO that made for 2 really shitty movies.
And we're
Mainly,
like,
they
what
were.
idiot would ever put themselves through this? And we're like,
Oh, no. But I mean, the shows were great. I loved the shows, and the movies sucked.
Gulager.
But then when it went to Bravo, it was the first time they decided to do a horror movie, and the resulting movie was terrific.
Did Wes Craven tell you guys you sucked on TV?
No. That honor is yours.
He optioned your script and told us that we sucked.
Well, there you go. But let's talk a little about the Project Greenlight process, because it started with the pitch, and you had to pitch well, and I've been in a room with you guys pitching, and I know how you guys are really adept at that. But let's talk about that whole process, especially when you had cameras in every room.
Well,
Although it was a little bit like Marcus is really good storytelling, and like he can just kind of tell a story and he'll act it out, and because really like in film school, a lot of the good people who pitched were also actors, because you're doing a stand-up bit essentially, because you're just trying to get someone excited, and so Marcus is good at that. But I think our success was at the result of other people's failure on the TV show, because everyone else is so boring that we were kind of interesting.
Oh, if I may, I was working at Blockbuster Home Video in Woodland Hills, restocking my restocking duties, and I received the screening passes for the test screening of the second Greenlight movie. And I was like, oh man, that's really cool. It's happening right up the street. Handed them out, and then my other job was working at an optometry clinic, and Patrick's wife heard on the radio that they might be doing a third season, and they may even consider doing a horror movie. Yeah. And we started to write what would become Feast on Halloween weekend, October ~99.
Wow.
And it was there, but an unruly 120 pages of what could only ultimately be 80, $25-30 million of what was promised to only come in at one. And so the first big lesson was learned, and that was a malleability, the passion to get it done and do it so much that you love it and would die for it. But at the same time, if there's someone in the room that's holding the gavel, it's their judgment, it's their call. And we learned someone who really wrote actually some wonderful material received a set of notes, as we received a set of notes, 20 points saying, cut this down, bring this budget down, and whatnot. They gave us 20. We squeezed at everything to give back 22 changes. This gentleman wrote back a letter requesting them to justify each one. and I think that was a painful lesson, but an important one.
Now, one thing that a lot of film teachers and classes and speakers tell film students is, it's terrible out there, give up now, you're never going to make it, and all that. That's bullshit. I mean, it may be true in some ways, but it's the best job in the world, making movies. Writing, directing, producing, whatever your passion is, if you can do it and you've got that dream and you're driven to do it, then do it. I'm here to encourage you, because it's fantastic if you can make your living doing what you most want to do and you're passionate about it. If you're going into it because you think it's a quick way to make a ton of money, then go home.
Yeah.
But,
what?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, but plus horror movies, because it's so concept based that you can make them for a price. And so, like
it's not star-driven. The knowing
not at all,
it might
not at
be
all.
something else.
But Poltergeist, people, my dad keeps asking me who's in Poltergeist. I'm like, who cares who's in Poltergeist? It's Poltergeist.
Who was in the first one? Craig T. Nelson and Jo Beth Williams, who had never been anything
But
before.
I think it's interesting because all of us sitting up here, and all of us have done it multiple times, but we've all written scripts that are 90 minutes long, with 5 people stuck in some location, with some external or internal horror pushing those people together and pulling them apart. And it's really it's a great genre in that you're able to do that, and that the audience lines up for that over and over and over again. And what you find when you give yourself those limitations, I mean, probably on Project Greenlight, you guys were told 1 or 2 locations, 20 shooting days, $1 million, 8 speaking parts, go. I mean, it's kind of Ed Wood style. You're given like this shopping list, and by the way, we've already got the poster, so you're gonna have to write it backward.
That happened to us with Boogeyman. When we came up for the rewrite, they had a poster that they had commissioned, and it was a little girl going like this. And so the one thing that Sam Raimi said is like, well, just somewhere in the script you have to have a little girl going shh somewhere. Okay, we'll do that.
And you did, yeah.
But what it forces you to do is since you go, well, this setup's already been done over and over again, thousands of times. 5 people in a house, it all happens in one night. Everyone's got to survive by sunrise. There's some kind of monster or a killer or an insect or something. So what's going to happen? And what it forces you to do is go more character-based with the story and find the ways that you can make, well, I haven't seen these kinds of characters enduring a night of horror like this, or I haven't seen this kind of creature or menace doing it to those kinds of people. So you're able to take the limitations and create your own unique voice.
Well, Feast was born out of like frustration, because I remember when we had the idea for Feast, we just had kind of a scene, and it was, let's make something for like one location, limited actors, and it just starts with someone kicks in the door to a bar and has a head in their hand and says, these things are out there and they're going to kill us. And that was the idea. And so it did balloon up to like $25 million movie, and then pared back down to like a $3 million movie. But that was the original idea, was to make something very small and contained that a lot of people could make. Because the problems that we ran into a lot of times is that when we wrote something that was too big, you can count on your hand. Okay, 5 people can make this, and if they don't want to, then I'm totally screwed. But if you write something that is, high concept, but can be made for a price, there's a ton of ways you can get that made, and that's why I think a lot of people, their introduction to like Hollywood is either directing or writing or producing horror movies, because if it only costs $1 million or $2 or $3, some of the city and the critics and the fans are a little bit more forgiving if it looks.
Well, there's also the thing about the familiarity of the genre, particularly in American horror films. I don't feel that most studio executives know or even like the horror genre, other than the financial aspects of it. You had a very unique situation because Lionsgate, after being, you started with Wes Craven and the whole Project Greenlight thing, and Lionsgate, Peter Block loves horror, knows horror, is one of the great Stephen King collectors of all time. And so there's still a level of familiarity to the formula of a horror movie at the major studios in particular. So let's talk a little about how you fulfill that. I mean, is it spoken to you specifically? We want to appeal to the 18-year-old, and we, the PG-13 horror movie is a particular genre unto itself of recent years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not averse to the PG-13 route. I think there's been plenty of scary movies. The Ring was PG-13. There's been some others that.
Sixth Sense is a great film.
Yeah, exactly.
There's not a drop of blood in it.
And I remember when I was working at Stan Winston's, we did some of the minimal effects that were in The Sixth Sense, and it was this was day one. It was before the phenomenon that it became, but. Knight was at the studio, and we were just talking about the script, and he said, I don't think like blood coming out of a fountain or a head coming off, to me that's not scary, but if you and your mom are the only ones who live in the house, and your mom's there or sleeping in her bed, but someone else is in the kitchen, or someone's in the hallway, or someone's standing where they're not supposed to be, to me that's scary. And I felt like he really adhered to that through The Sixth Sense and made that what it was.
And just back to what you were saying, in my experience of the 9 years we've been doing this, I don't feel like anybody that there's no one that we've worked with that isn't into horror movies. I mean, we've worked with Sam Raimi, we've worked with Wes Craven, we work with Michael Bay, and
I'm talking more about the studio executives than the.
But I still feel like that. I can't really say that there has been one studio executive that I didn't feel like, maybe they're great actors, but they really seem like they were into it, and I don't know if that's because we do more psychological stuff than kind of like kind of slasher, that type of thing, but that really hasn't been our experience.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about. Well, go ahead.
Well, I'm just sometimes. Like when you talk to, I think what you're getting towards is sometimes when you talk to a studio executive, they will list the horror films that everyone's supposed to say that they love, and those generally aren't Friday the 13th. Yeah, exactly. And so often what happens, and this has happened to us a few times, is that they say that they want it to be an R-rated, gory horror experience, but once they take that next step and they get into it, they're like, oh, I can't do this, because they don't have a good grasp upon, the real nuance of horror and the depth of horror.
Now, I know you guys are fans of foreign horror films. I don't know what your feelings are, but some of the most original movies are being made by people like Takashi Miike, or Swedish movie Let the Right One In, which is just a brilliant vampire movie of recent years. And because of Masters of Horror, I mean, I was always interested in international horror films, but we wanted to make that an international series. And the good thing about that was that it was not being financed by a studio or a network. We did it independently, and so we got all of these great horror filmmakers to make films for no money and no time, but they had complete creative control, final cut, all of that. So they either wrote or had their writers write or chose scripts that we had developed that appealed to their specific senses. So none of those movies had to be mall tested. None of them went to the Galleria theaters and had 17-year-old kids tell us that we needed to change the ending. So it was pure in a sense that you don't get in the United States horror market. And I'll never have that experience again. It was 2 fantastic years of no interference and just giving the freedom to these people like John Carpenter and Tobe Hooper and all these guys who hadn't had that in years. But you still see that overseas. I mean, I'd love to work overseas and make some. We shot 2 of our masters in Tokyo, and that was a great experience. But I'd love that experience, and I don't know about you guys, but to be able to work that way.
Well, we were very fortunate within that last year to we wrote a screenplay, and then when I was able to direct it, we didn't run into absolute power, but we did run into enough indifference where we got away with it. And it was like, well, they're not spending enough to really care if we go this far.
Well, this genre does have and that's what I was hinting at with the executives often.
Yeah.
It's an indifference that they don't know what's a good horror movie or a bad horror movie. If it tests well, or if it's scary, or the kids like it, it's a good horror movie.
I think there's all these little strategies that we benefited from the wisdom of producers that had been through it, and even knew the executives down to preferences of coffee and whatnot, and said, so first night we got to shoot some nudity. Like, what? Just if they see the dailies, they're going to insist on watching the first day. They're going to watch 10 minutes of them. If they see a great body, they're going to be off your back for 2 weeks. Now, you're only shooting for 19 days, so that's pretty much the whole shoot. Like, all right, no arguments. No need to twist the arm. Load it up.
Well, but like the weird thing too about getting really graphic, extreme gore and stuff like that is that people may like it, they might eat it up and go to the opening weekend, but it's very difficult to test. Like for example, is everyone familiar with Hostel? Right, Eli Roth's Hostel, really good movie, very successful. But we were at the first test screening for it. We snuck in and we watched. It was at the Bridge, and I just thought it was fucking fantastic. I knew nothing about it. I knew Eli's first Cabin Fever, which was pretty good, but this one, and in my mind too, because he was so successful and sort of like a character and stuff, I'm like, oh, this guy's gonna suck, this is gonna suck. But then I was like, whoa, my jaw hurt because I was so tense in that movie, and we scored it like, whoa, 5s across the board, which is the best you can give it, and it got a 39, which is not a good score, really.
People have to know what they're getting.
But people were eating it up. I mean, the place was going nuts. Like, the girl's eyes coming out, and then 39.
Horror movies don't test well because people feel guilty about. They don't want to give high scores because it makes them seem sleazy, or or guilty, or this is gutter work.
Feast. Okay, yeah. Feast. We tested Feast. It was on TV. Enough you guys remember it. So we're in Lakewood, and we're screening. We're so fucking nervous. It's the first time Bob Weinstein shows up, and he's like, let's do this movie. And so he's sitting right in front of us, and the place is going nuts. Screaming, laughing, ah! At the end, big round of applause. Bob turns to us and says, "You guys just kicked fucking ass." Walks out, and he's like dancing in the parking lot, and then they're like, 46. I'm like, 46, really? And just wow, like everyone's enthusiasm. He was saying get the cameras over here, and he said, and he did this for the cameras. Goes on the show. He goes, what was it? When Matt.
By the way, you are doing right now.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I do. Yeah. Did I sign this release? But he says, and he says, get the cameras. When Matt Damon didn't like the script, I thought we were in trouble. But when Ben Affleck didn't like it, I knew I picked the right one. And he's like 11,100 screens, $15 million P&A. We're going out big. And then we got the score, and it was like, maybe not. and if anyone knows, we were out for 2 nights. Like it was like one night on Friday, one showing on Friday, one night on Saturday, and that was it.
Well, that's the thing too. Testing on genre films is notoriously inaccurate. It's very difficult to do it well. The only value of it is to sit in the theater with the audience during that. But once you open it up to the focus groups will always rip it to shreds, especially a horror movie, because they all want to seem smarter than the filmmakers. And in making a good horror movie, you have to be a couple of steps ahead of the audience to build that tension and take it in directions that they're not expecting, but they will be satisfied by. And it's a very complicated thing. But one of the things we should talk about is maybe the first 10 pages of a horror script. I mean, the important thing is, particularly in the business the way it is now, there's no slow burn anymore. You can't slowly ramp up. I mean, we did some interesting things on Masters of Horror because we could break all those rules. I did a film called Chocolate that was based on a short story that I wrote that, horror fans in the U.S. hated, but it dealt with sexuality and it was not your standard thrill kill story, but it was huge in Europe. So, but the 10 pages, the first 10 pages, something really thrilling and horrifying has to take place. I think that's a golden rule now. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, recently I read a script, that we were looking at, as a possible rewrite, and it was a very slow ramp up, and I mean, it just felt like it was begging for an opening teaser to really set the stage and let the reader know what they were about to get and let the audience know what they were about to get. Because
reading it, I thought it was a drama, and this was a project that was for a rewrite, and I got to about page 40, and it was really good writing and interesting, but I was kind of all over the place. What kind of movie is this? Is this a drama? And then kind of the really hard scare came around 45, and then it started going as a horror movie, and you have to let your audience know what they're about to watch.
And I think the luxury that you have in a horror script is it can be something that's seemingly unrelated to the people that you then meet on page 3 or 4, that then you go, then your curiosity is going, well, how is that opening moment going to connect to these people? And then, you see that they start to cross paths on page 15 or page 30. But you also, by doing that, you then buy yourself time to then slow it down and
meet the people and
meet the people and then build it back up, because you've shocked really hard up front, and that buys you the time then to do your character development stuff and get into the story and do the slow burn then. If you've done those 3 pages up front.
You forget about that opening scene. I know I do a lot of the times. I forget about those first 2 minutes, but it's in my subconscious that something's disturbing about. I'm meeting all new characters, but I feel unsettled. Why do I feel
unsettled? And you'll
unsettled?
be reminded later on.
Yeah, exactly. But it's kind of in there, and it's set the tone for what I'm about to see.
But you know what really bothers me, and this is having watched a lot of horror films, and we tried to sort of like go against this in Feast, and I think that's what a lot of people sort of liked about it, was staying away from the formula of, here's my opening kill, and then we're going to introduce the characters, and when there's not going to be another kill, or gross out scene or whatever, until 30 minutes in. So it's like, opening kill, yay! Oh, and I have to wait for 20 minutes for these people to talk, and the new person's going to show up, and there's a love interest, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, it finally starts again. Great. Yeah. So it's like, so at the same time, you don't want it to be like too formulaic in that sense. Like sometimes when we watch stuff now, it's like you want to go against the grain of like having that stock opening kill. And so
Well, I love, for example, the Japanese film Audition by Takashi Miike. You know, it goes on for 45 minutes before you know it's a horror film. For 45 minutes, it's comedic, dramatic, and sympathetic characters. These guys pretending to be producers so they can meet women, and then this unbelievably horrifying event takes place 40 minutes in. I love that, and I wish you could do that here, but you can't. Now, do you guys spend a lot of time creating an opening scene idea first?
Well, we actually had a situation a couple of times where, if you write it, you craft it, balance everything out, and then the scare ratio, and then in the case with the collector, 90-page script. All right. Well, we asked for the budget. We're not going to get it, so we're going to lose these first 10 pages and the last 5. Deal with it. You're shooting in 48 hours.
Nice.
Yeah, so, we're like, okay. Thank goodness it still is the story. And then, of course, what are the first comments you get on that rough cut of the first one? It really takes a while to get going, if we could just have that. So in this case, thank goodness we had Saw, because I literally spent every penny I made from him to fund my own shoot for the opening scare, the ending I wanted, and most of the middle. And it was like, you can tell me to cut here, but you can't stop me from turning in what I obligated myself to provide. Now that I'm hoping I'm young enough and dumb enough to do it just once, but the effect works. And then
you think it's going to get easier?
No. Well, I hope not, because it's too much fun. But the other thing is, now there's a different thing, which you had to have run into. Now it's, we got to show a scene online, and it's really got to be graphics. We want to get that brutal hardcore audience. So maybe just take this one. It's like, if you give away who's dead here, why am I spending 20 minutes introducing him? Why give what? But then I'm thinking, wait, that opening scare really doesn't. Yeah, why don't we just show that? And then it's good. It's out. It's right away. If it's effective, cool.
Well, let's talk a little about the transition, because you're now in post-production on your very first film as a director, after having written a bunch of things with your partner here. So is it what you expected? How is it what you expected, and how is it not? And is it better, or is it worse, or in what ways?
Well, there's 3 storytellers in that process. There's the writer that sits down and contributes the story, and then the director takes it and shoots what he can, and the editor then takes that and delivers the final version. What was really nice is we were able to wear a couple of hats of the chain this time around. I moved the editing bay into my living room. That helped.
Save money, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I know I've got someone I can talk to and be vulnerable with, where it's like, my gosh, I'm trying to protect this story that we sat at the typewriter, we bled for a few months, and we came out with this thing, and, I've got 3 hours to execute it. What do you say? That was nice.
Writing the things, especially with like the Saw stuff, because it's such by committee, you just have this natural detachment that you go, okay, it's done, and I sure hope it turns out, and then you watch a cut several months later, and it's like some of it you remember, and some of you're like, what happened there? And then some of it you missed, and then you're like, okay, yeah, and it's sort of it's kind of what you wanted, and some of it, and you're either happy or sad.
But it does bring us to the question of how you feel when you sit there in the theater and see a movie that you've written. Whether you've written it all the way to the end or not, I don't know. When I first started doing it, the process was you just throw more writers at a movie until it gets made. So I saw, I was the first writer on Batteries Not Included and Hocus Pocus and Fly 2, and those were all movies when I went and saw them I was horrified by, and I learned to say thank you when people tell me how much they and their children like them. But
Fly 2 was awesome.
Yeah,
I'll talk about.
thanks.
Fly baby.
We've only had 2 movies made, and only 2 movies. I mean, it's so hard to get a movie made, so it's incredible that we have 2 movies made. But Boogeyman, that was kind of a strange experience in that it just kind of really wasn't what we really intended it to be. And
yeah, it was just I'll let you finish, but it was one of those things where there was a writer, and then he had to go off to run his TV show, and then we were brought on, and we kind of did some drafts, and then we went away, and then some other writer who I don't know came on, and he did some work, and then
We came back
on, and I mean,
And then the director wasn't there for the reshoot, so we worked with a second direct. We actually worked with 3 directors on Boogeyman.
But that movie was very much just a process. There was a release date. They wanted to get it out. That train was moving, and we were
Either get on.
Yeah,
or-
we were on the
We'll
train.
get on.
We
We'll get on
wanted
the
to
train.
learn and be writers.
But with Knowing, we finished it. I was pregnant when I was writing Knowing and gave birth while I was writing Knowing, and had an infant while I was writing Knowing. And I now have a 5-year-old son, so we finished that 5 years ago. And that was a movie that was just so the script so near and dear to us, and we just loved that script, and really felt like out of a lot of the things we've written, that was the one we wanted made the most. And we worked with Alex Proyas on a couple of drafts, and then for like 3 years they were trying to get an actor, and Russell Crowe had it like 6 months, and just kind of actors get it one at a time, and so you sit there and wait for that actor, and then it goes to the next actor. But we didn't see Knowing until the premiere of it, so that was the first thing we ever got to see of the movie, and it was in New York. And again, I was sick. And it was amazing to me, because about 10 or 15 minutes into it, I detached from being the writer of it. And I was just watching it as a movie, and I cried at the end, like I didn't know that's what was going to happen. I was like,
That's great.
I'm crying, and it was like such an awesome experience. Like it was, and the woman next to me was crying, and I was like, she's crying over here, So that was like a magical experience for me, and I'm really glad that I got to have that, because I don't think that happens a lot of the times.
Now, what about you guys? I mean,
We cry for different reasons often.
but your experience when you
Why did you
Feast was the
direct
first
scene like
one.
that, you idiot?
Thank you. I think I saw Feast 30-some times, and I loved it more every time. It felt like that it made a lot of weekends when I had too much acne to get a date, and the horror movie was my friend. It felt like it made it legit. I love that my mom and my dad and my uncle and my aunt and my sister were all there, and those were, my cohorts in the late-night movie marathons on the USA Network, where they'd cut out the boobs but left all the blood. We were safely thrilled by that, and we were able to make a contribution back and hopefully keep some other youngster up a little too late, show them something kind of taboo, but ultimately let them know the world's going to be okay.
It is neat when you see it getting better. It's sometimes maddening at first when you see it, and it's not quite what you imagined, or scenes aren't quite where they were, or actors aren't delivering lines how you want them to, or whatever. But then through the process of seeing it getting better, that can be rewarding.
Well, you were involved all the way through production, right? You were doing on-scene rewrites and things.
Everything that we've been involved with. Well, that's not entirely true, but we've done rewrite stuff where we haven't been as involved. But for like the things we've been credited for, we've been involved through most of the process.
It's fascinating, because the nice thing about, there's Feast 1, Feast 2, and Feast 3, each with budgets that went down and stakes, reputation-wise, that just soared. Because we felt like for our friend and the guy that gave us a chance, there's a Gulager family who cast his wife and his brother and his dad, knowing that they would clock out after 8 hours on paper but stay 15 so their son could get the shots to make that story that we'd all been working on is amazing. You start to see these individuals, artists, and their art might be mayhem, but it's art, and they have let themselves walk out onto a plank, and sometimes the studio says, sorry, you wake up and you have half your budget, and they're out there to defend this thing, and it's their name above it, because now there is this entity out there that is going to represent them, and that's fascinating, because over those 3 movies, there was one that suffered the tidal wave of a studio separation when I think it was Dimension and the Weinsteins left Disney, and then the second one, it started shooting the weekend, almost like 6 weeks before the writer's strike. And I was there. And I'd scraped my inner ear with a paper clip, and it had swollen shut. So I was lying on the ground, and they were trying to like, you gotta get a draft, we gotta get a draft. I can't hear you, and I don't know what's going on. And then at the same time, I had status as a director because the Midnight Man was to shoot next. But it was what a tidal wave of experience and like adjustment, and how you pick your lines and you learn to love your damn guild because they have your back.
Well, that's another thing too. What I started with tonight was talking about how there's not nearly as much respect in the horror genre as there is in more mainstream genre, but it's harder to make a good horror film than it is to make a good drama. With a good script, a good cast, and a good cameraman, you can make a terrific drama. You need much more than that to make a good horror film, because it's more than just good characters and good performances. It's manipulating the audience on a ride in a way that they don't anticipate, and yet not disappointing them. Now, were you childhood horror fans as well? Did you stay up and watch the creature feature?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll just speak briefly, but yeah, I mean, absolutely watching the late night horror films. Halloween stuff I probably wasn't supposed to see. Wes Craven films that we had when I was a senior in high school. They had a day where the seniors got to take over the high school. So we taught the classes and we were the principals, and we basically extorted money from the students to raise money for the prom or something. But I was the editor of the high school newspaper, and I got to teach the journalism class. And I basically brought in videos of queued up scenes of my favorite like kills in Wes Craven films and showed them to the students and had them write like Weekly World News style tabloid articles about the scene in Deadly Friend when the robot throws the basketball at the old woman's head and it explodes up the wall, and the
How many of you remember that?
it's great. YouTube it tonight when you get home. And the students had never seen that before, and I taught all 6 periods that day, and I just loved hitting that moment over and over again on the VHS. But and then I mean, just big time fan, but I never really connected personally until I was older, until I was in college, like that's that I could come up with those stories on my own, that I could write those. And I think specifically, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Poltergeist, those were the films that took place in settings that looked like my neighborhood. It wasn't the spooky black and white castle up on the hill. It was the suburbs. It was a neighborhood. It was schools, and I think that's when it really started to click for me. Like, maybe there were a world of horror stories that I could tell that were more about the life that I knew.
And I wasn't one of those people, and I grew up as an incredibly terrified child, and my parents, Rosemary's Baby would come on TV every year. This is before video or anything like that, and they would have me because I just had nightmares. I had all kinds of issues. I thought, the cat man lived out in the woods. He was going to get us, and so they would close off the TV room while they all watched.
Like, Juliet, you cannot watch this movie. It will scare you too much. But we're going to close the door. Do not watch this movie.
So I would sit outside and I would hear all the dialogue, and it was so much more creepy just to hear that, and my imagination went crazy. And when I finally saw Rosemary's Baby when I was like 25, I was like, this is Rosemary's Baby?
As a kid, you're hearing, what did you do to its eyes? Yeah. What did you do to its eyes? And going, what? What does that look like on the other side of the door?
I remember years ago being asked to write a sequel to Rosemary's Baby at Paramount, Richard Christian Matheson and I didn't want to do it. I couldn't do that.
I hear you.
Yeah.
But I also, I was a very strange child, and kind of a strange adult too now, but I loved Flannery O'Connor, and I loved The Lottery, Shirley Jackson's Lottery. I was really drawn to really morbid and morose stuff, and a lot of that had to do with my childhood. I had kind of a rough childhood, and I started writing when I was about 8 years old, and I actually published my first short story when I was 11. My dad's a philosophy professor and would send off my poems and book reviews, and going back, I kind of found my old file, like you were talking about finding your old film school stuff. I found this old file of my stuff that I wrote when I was 11, and it was dark shit, man. Dark shit.
I think you'll find that very few of the people responsible for making horror movies were part of the Cleaver family, and I don't mean that kind of Cleaver, but it's the work of outsiders. It's not the prom queen and king that are writing and directing horror films. It's the people who did not have happy childhoods, and I think an increasing number of society can identify with that. Stephen King was not on the cheerleading squad, and
there's something cathartic for me about. I don't know how I ended up in this. I'll never write a comedy. That doesn't fulfill me. But there's something about torturing another human being, but having them come out. For me, they have to come out okay in the end, and it's something cathartic for me knowing you can
maybe
be tortured.
missing a nose and an eye, but
yeah,
they're okay.
Eyes pecked out. We did the birds, and but there's something cathartic for me knowing that this person will survive and can get through this ordeal.
And now, what about you guys? What were your favorite films?
Well, he is okay. Well, Marcus is from a small town, and so his first, he told me about his grandmother, bought him a fake arm for his 5th birthday or something like that. What was that?
She was an ER nurse, and she took me to my first horror movie in theater. She took me to Creepshow 2, and her only comment when the lights came up, was, I get it, it was eating your face, but why didn't she wake up when he was kissing her chest? You're right, Grandma. And good point.
I didn't realize that I knew horror films really well until I went to film school, and I'd be referencing Chud, and people are like, what the fuck are you talking about? And they're like, you don't know Chud?
My wife wrote the lyrics to Chud 2's theme song. But
Chud. Yeah. And that just came from, I grew up in the 80s and stuff where video was very in, and we had Betamax and stuff like that. And so, great choice there. And so we, I just, was in this Evanston, Illinois, where I grew up, and we had this great video store called Video Adventure, and it was $1 a rental, and I just got everything, and I'd go and say, what's the, cheapest, dirtiest horror movie you have, and that was actually how I was introduced to Chud. They're like, you seen this piece of shit? And I was like,
it's good shit, man.
So, and then not until film school did I really know I had a knowledge of it. And then this guy, I thought I knew a lot of stuff, and he'll just come up with the most ridiculous things and talk about the pitch meetings,
Well, we're pretty lucky, everyone here, in that there was one summer where I didn't quite have my wheels, aka the Honda scooter, but I could get a ride to the video store, and I thought, I think in 1 week in town, if you were a kid going to the movies, this week you could see everything out there, and you'd see a Transformers sequel, you'd see Star Trek, and you'd see things. And then 10 years from now, I don't know if all the titles that are out there now will be pinnacles, of their representation, but I remember there was one summer where I saw Taxi Driver, Clockwork Orange, Suspiria, The Exorcist, everything, French Connection, bam, 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 and it was just seminal, and all of a sudden, a consistency of just wow was happening with what you could do in this little borrowed TV in the black and white, and I thought that's kind of awesome. And then horror became this kind of sustained adrenaline rush when I could find the next thing that I would have to watch through my fingers. Also, all those early Argento films. It's the Suspirias and The Bird with Crystal Plumage, and wow, this guy's actually taking what those other slasher movies, but he's making them pretty. And what's with that music? He's actually using string-based instruments. This doesn't sound like a Casio. This guy's trying.
That's why I jumped to get him to do Masters, and he did a couple of brilliant ones, really great stuff. Before we open it up to questions, just one quick question for everybody about remakes. There's some who would love to remake a favorite film because they love it so much, the way Peter Jackson did with King Kong, or those who would love to remake something that could be improved upon. And if you had your choice of a film to remake, if you've thought of it, what would you choose?
Race with the Devil.
Now we're talking.
Yeah. Yeah. Peter Fonda. Well, see, okay, it's a good example. Like that movie is flawed, but it's really fun, and it was one of those movies that I think I saw, and then I had a really fond memory of it, and then I watched it again, and I'm like, oh, okay, that could be better.
How about you?
Wow. A couple of things ran into my head. But you kind of want. I really thought I'm going to repeat a title. It's The Bird with Crystal Plumage. I loved it, but it was almost like, wait, I think I might love it too much to find. I don't know if there's much to improve on it at all. It might sync up the audio.
Just making it modern, a modern adaptation would be enough.
I think so. It was just that great combination of lovely and scary.
Juliet?
My brain doesn't think that way. We actually had a meeting with Roy Lee, and he asked us the same question. Roy Lee, who did all the Japanese remakes and The Ring, and he asked us the same question. I was like, no, no answer.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. I don't have an answer at the moment. Maybe 20 minutes from now, if someone's asking a question, it'll pop into my mind. So if I just blurt out a movie title, that's
Chinatown.
Yeah,
Chinatown.
Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Marcus has one for you. You just got very excited.
Last of the Dogmen. Tom Berenger and Barbara Hershey find a tribe untouched by civilization in the middle of the woods, and they find it because there's been a gruesome murder because some innocent hunter stumbled upon them.
Gotta see that. Frankenheimer's The Prophecy needs to be remade.
Yes, it does.
That was a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't think that way either, but just in considering this, one of my favorite things that I would love to see a new version of would be God Told Me To. I love that film with a passion, and it's a brilliant, crazy film in ways that I don't think even Larry Cohen knows why it's so brilliant. But that's a great film. If you've never seen God Told Me To, go rent it, put it on your Netflix list right away. But it's about time to open it up to questions. And so you're the first one as soon as we get a microphone to you, and it's on its way right now. All right.
Yeah, in a lot of films and screenwriting books, they talk about the protagonist and the hero's journey. Most horror films don't seem to have that type of a journey. I was wondering if you can comment on what type of a journey the protagonist has.
That's the great thing about horror movies, and one of the unsung wonderful elements of it is people of more realistic and flawed personality are often anchored in horror films. A great example is Gary Busey in Silver Bullet. That's a wonderful performance. Uncle Red's the most believable uncle I've ever seen in a film. And so he's got to deal with a one-eyed werewolf that's trying to eat people. But it didn't stop him from delivering something honest and true. Who's the best, most engaging character of Friday the 13th Part 3D? It's actually the biker gang. Because when does a biker gang roll through a town like that? And they were sucking gasoline out of cars and filling them. It was like, wow, I was getting straight A's and the wrong education. And I was fascinated. And then the horror movie came in, and they were the most interesting people to deal with it.
For us, we always try to have an interesting story without the horror element first. We always talk about what would this movie be if there weren't ghosts in it? What would this movie be if there weren't birds in it? And we sit and talk about their journeys, where they start out as characters in the beginning and where they come out at the end. That's the most interesting thing to me as a writer. And if I'm sent something where I don't feel like this character starts out somewhere and can't end up somewhere else, I'm not really interested in doing it, because I'm really interested in the dramatic elements of the horror movies that we write.
Yeah, and I also think that horror is a great area to play to kind of subvert those typical rules. I mean, and I think if you were writing a script and you were doing that and subverting it in a different way, you could also really get people's attention. But I think Psycho is a great example where you're set up to believe that this is your main character and this is your hero, and when she's killed, you're stuck with Norman. Suddenly,
That's your hero.
Yeah, so it's like, oh, I don't know if I signed up to be with Norman, but
then you're on his side.
Yeah, you're being handed Norman, and that's, I mean, horror lets you do that. Horror lets you play around with those archetypes.
So not so much Joseph Campbell in our research here. Yeah. Okay. Back here in the back row, it's coming to you.
Recently, I took a look at the Lionsgate horror movie DVD page of their website. I recommend it to anybody.
Sounds like trouble, by the way, but okay.
And there are a lot of movies in the horror genre that basically are B movies that, even just by the title and the description and the cover of the box, look unwatchable. And it seems like all of you are aspiring to do theatrically released, studio produced, high quality horror movies. And I was wondering if you have a distinction in your mind between what makes a horror movie a B movie and what makes it an A movie. And it seems like in this particular genre, it is easy to, if you go in the wrong direction, to have it turn into a joke.
Well, I think that it depends on who's doing it. I think some of the best genre films are the low-budget independent things that don't have big movie stars and compromises from the studio end.
Right. It's not necessarily that, but I mean, a lot of the filmmakers don't take it seriously, and sort of like they're coming out with movies that are like, Killer Toasters, 5 or whatever.
Because that's all they're selling is the concept. They're not selling a movie. Oh, yeah. It got rewritten.
It was good. Well, but I mean, I think you're speaking to, like, sometimes there's a lot of things. Like, in making movies, so many things can go wrong. And so generally people start with the best intentions. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes someone says, okay, horror movies make money, so let's make a horror movie. And here's $2 million and go do it. Good luck. And it often ends up bad. But most people are trying to do their best, but you'll sometimes find yourself in a situation where it's not going to happen. You don't have enough resources. You're not on the same page creative with people, and then people just sort of do a half-assed job and walk away, and it ends up being bad, because no one cares.
And not everyone is talented.
True.
That's an ugly truth.
But I think we always try. I mean, we've we've had the good luck of doing movies with decent budgets. Theirs bigger than ours. It's trying to be just a little smarter than the average fare, because if you have a knowledge of horror movies, you go, okay, we're with these characters in this situation, and generally it's going to be this. But if you have any sort of desire to do something better, you'll go, okay, let's do it this way. And that's actually a benefit of having a writing partner, because sometimes I'll be like, isn't that great? I'm like, that's fucking bullshit. And then oh, okay, maybe it is. And so you do have that person to check you a bit, so it's like you're getting almost a free rewrite out of it. So hopefully we won't be writing the Killer Toaster 6.
And this is a little off topic, but what we tend to do is, if we're going to do a ghost story, like when we were doing The Waiting, that Wes Craven optioned, we watched every single ghost story we could. And because we wanted to see what are the things that you have to do in a ghost story, because you want to follow the certain audience expectations, but how are we going to turn this on its ear? And what we did with The Waiting was, we've seen people be scared of ghosts in all of these movies, be terrified and, find my body and, that kind of thing. And we were like, well, what if a woman fell in love with a ghost child, and this ghost child wanted this woman to be her mother? And so it's find the movies like the movie that you're interested in doing, watch them all, and try to turn it on its ear.
But specifically, just to return to your question one more time, because the audience for horror doesn't require movie stars or big production values or anything, you can get a film made in Wisconsin or by people who've never done anything before and have a good title or concept and sell it to a DVD company, because you can do that with a horror movie that you can't do with other genre.
And the films you're referencing are probably acquisitions. They're not something that was made and developed at the studio and let's get buying this movie. It's just like they're acquiring it for $100,000 just for DVD.
Unless it was Midnight Meat Train, which is a great film that they totally fucked.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, very pretty movie.
Yeah, they're really good. Okay, we have one down here. Ding, 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 ding. He's coming.
I liked The Knowing. I watched it just a few months ago. It's great. But I just wanted to ask a question, like when you're coming up with ideas for torture and horror and stuff, do you just kind of have a laugh with it and just go, oh, let's just slice this person's head off, or
I'll answer that. We have a 5-year-old, and I forget a lot of the times when, like, we're feeding him dinner, and Stiles will go, no, instead of having her get the stake through the eye, how about if we, she drowns in the bathtub, and our kid's looking at us like, what?
Are you talking about me, Mom?
But yeah, I mean, you do have to detach yourself a little bit, and we say every day we have the most ridiculous jobs in the world, and it's great. We love it,
Yep. Well, there was one that we tested out. Recently, it seems to be getting a pretty damn good reaction. It's just based off an old small-town Illinois police tactic, and our local sheriff had a bit of weight on him and had chased a perp. That's street talk now. Into
You are so damn street.
yeah.
All these ridiculous stories, and they all start very slowly and gently. And here
So the criminal had run into a cornfield, and this guy wasn't up to the chase. So he went to his trunk, pulled out his fishing tackle, strung hooks in a zigzag pattern, set on a hay bale, and waited for the first scream. And he got him. And then it's like, hey, what about that? Oh yeah, And there it is.
That's fun.
Okay. As writing partners, what are your greatest challenges? And do you guys write together in the same room? Do you write separate scenes separately? How do you do that?
What we do first is we sit and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and outline and outline and outline. And I mean, it's just nonstop talking. And then we divide up sequences. Like, Stiles might take the first 15 pages. I'll go take the second 15. And we go write separately. And we then give each other the pages that we've written, and then he makes me cry about my pages, and then we get in a big fight, and
Oh, this is gonna last.
yeah, 15 years, and then we kind of give each other notes, and then we go back and work on our scenes again, and work and work and work, and then give it back to each other, and it's kind of like a back and forth type of thing, and then
kind of by the time we do our final polish, it's just both of us together side by side and really finessing it. So, whenever I read one of our, final drafts, I really don't remember anymore what I wrote and what she wrote, and feels like we're both constantly working on each other's stuff. But yeah, to get that first draft done, we split it up. And we also take the scenes that kind of get us each excited in different ways. And it's like, well, this part, let me work on with this sequence, and that. And also we also start to kind of have an affinity for certain characters. Maybe I'll have someone's voice kind of in my head, and she'll have a couple other characters, and so I'll take all that character's scenes, and she'll take the other, and then kind of
and then like the
paste
last
it all
week,
together.
it's side by side, and we sit and read through everything together, and that's when the real fighting happens. Those are the rough days. So,
How about you guys?
a lot of accusations made and threats. No, it is, having a partner is beneficial because to outline, to break the story and stuff like that, because there's going back and forth, and so we definitely do that. We get in a room, outline it really well together, and then when we go off to draft, we don't generally sit in the same room. Like I'll do a pass, and then I'll give it to Marcus, and he'll read it, and then we'll talk about it, and then he'll do it, and then we'll go sort of back and forth until we're happy with it. And then at the end, like when it's when you're really polishing it up, then we're generally in the same room, and you're going through scenes specifically and lines and stuff like that.
you write the whole draft yourself first, and then okay.
Yeah. So yeah.
And we're pretty darn lucky that we've been able to try a lot of different methods. For example, Saw having rules, the Saw series. I had a red wall in my living room, and we took index cards and shingled the entire wall with anchors that we knew we needed to hit, ideas that we'd always wanted to see, and then the notes we were getting. Oh wait, and then we have to adhere to a timeline. So her hair was at ear level in this timeline, so it's got to be here for this. And but he broke his foot, so if he's limping, he can't hop through that trap. Shit.
But it was sort of a strange learning experience for us, because we did write Feast together, but that was written in 99, 2000, and then I went off to film school, and he went off to the Blockbuster, and so
Film school too.
and then we suddenly like won this contest, and now you're writing partners and you're horror writing guys, and go out, and like our first pitch was fucking awful. Like it was just like we were so spastic in the room and going so fast it was ridiculous. And so anyway, like we had to learn, like we didn't know how to. We had done Feast together, we didn't know how to write. So the first thing we did a rewrite, which is pretty much a page 1 rewrite of Highlander 5, the source.
That's my favorite of all of them.
I know. And so that's one of those ones you watch and you're like, whoa, thank God we're not on the credits for that one. But, so like for that one, like I think we did the story together kind of, because we had to do it in a really short amount of time. And this is on the set of Feast, and so like I wrote the first act, and we were like, okay, I'm gonna write the first act, you write the second act, and I write the third act. So and it was like how can you write the third act without having read the second act? And so it's like
It's Highlander 5.
I was like Marcus, I'm done, and he was like and so I get this second act, and it's like 90 pages long, and so we had like 135 page Highlander script. It was like so ridiculous, and so it was a learning experience.
But blessed to have the opportunity. That's like wow, to be able to cut one's teeth in that arena is fun, and that it's great because I don't know. Some of my favorite movies I know are maybe someone's embarrassment or someone's pride, but either way, I'm glad they're out there because horror movies generally captivate off the general idea that we'd all like to see someone having a worse day than us.
I'm a writer too. I just want to know if, before you write the script, do you write the treatment first and then go into the script?
It depends on if you're hired by a studio and
If they pay for it.
boy, really?
Great question. It's a great question
Really?
because if a studio hires you, they require the treatment step because they want to see. Well, usually.
If it's something that we're just doing on a spec that we're doing on our own, I don't think we'd ever do that, right? We'd never sit down. We would talk it through and stuff, but when you're hired by a studio, you write treatments, and we've written treatments that we haven't been paid for. I mean, it's
I also feel like, I know for me, I think it helps manage expectations, and it's a good moment to have right before you start your draft that you can get a good round of notes and kind of get a good temperature of they kind of, in meetings, they said they liked certain things, and now they're not reacting the same way in this treatment, or they're feeling
them.
You pull out your treatment and go, you agreed to this.
But it is. I feel like it's a good document to have kind of everyone signs off on it, and then I feel like in the script, I can really amp that up and go beyond the treatment and make sure I'm giving them everything that's there that's promised, but go further with the characters, and things that they thought were maybe going to be a 7 as a scare can be a 10 or 11, or we can find ways that even go beyond. But I like having.
I have a question. What's the longest treatment you guys have done?
44 pages.
Yeah. I don't know. I have a thing, but like I hate treatments. I feel like I'm like not wasting time, but like I think we prefer to do like really detailed outlines where it's like beats, like like it's someone's like a beat sheet is just like this happens, this happens, this happens, and so I don't know. Sometimes we prefer to do that, and then just constantly expand upon that, so it can become 20, 25 pages, but it started as a beat sheet as opposed to doing like prose and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean I won't go into the whole story, but I mean we were in a situation once where we delivered a 30-page outline, and we were told the outline's not scary enough, and we're like, oh boy, we're heading, and that was the roll of the dice on that project with those executives and those producers, and they wanted more insurance before we started our draft, like that they really 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 knew what they were going to get. And I mean by that point the 44-page treatment had dialogue and scenes and full-blown action sequences written out. I mean, it was like a halfway step.
Well, when a screenplay finds itself, you find yourself going places you didn't anticipate going in the treatment that's required, but it is an insurance policy the studio wants that they know where you're going and they're not going to be too surprised, but it's sometimes nice to surprise them in ways that they don't expect, because you're going to find kernels and nuggets of things that turn into something exciting. But I'm with Juliet when it comes to spec stuff. I hate putting anything together first. I just want to sit down on page one and do it. But you're not allowed to do that if you're writing for hire.
And the magical stuff doesn't happen in a treatment. I'm sorry. It happens when you start working a scene and you have characters starting to talk to each other. I fucking hate treatments.
Well, that's what I was going to say, and I've said this in meetings before, where we've gotten that fucking like, it's not scary enough. I'm like, it's a treatment. How is it not scary? Of course it's not scary. It's a treatment. And so anyway, like, because the thing is you should definitely know where you're going. I mean that's important. I think generally. But until you actually get in there and get into the scene and are actually hearing the people talk, you never know where it's going to go. It's going to go left or right, and so
those are exciting findings. Discoveries that you come across as a writer, as a creative human being. Those discoveries are great.
You talked earlier about building tension in the script, and I was wondering if you could talk about the writer's voice and the voice of the script, and how you use that to build tension and suspense.
Well, we had one fun opportunity where we had about 40 pages of a screenplay that was silent, and there was no dialogue, and it was all tactic and evasion. So
that's hard to read scenes like that.
Oh
too.
Goodness, eighth of a page, and that was a lot of fun. I mean, then you sometimes it would be emboldened sound effects we'd lay in. Arkin reaches for the door, but based on the sound of the creak, the killer's a few steps away. He might make a sound. Fuck. You can put it in the action. He waits, and then another line. Waits. He just might be able to make it. He takes a try anyway. The door creaks. Pause. And then
it's a great question, because you want the script to be fun to read. You want it to be readable and enjoyable prose. And so many scripts are just blueprints that are dry. And when they're horror explanations, first of all, never put a block of type more than 5 lines long. And
I skim all that anyway. Like if it's more than 5 lines, I just kind of jump to.
Yeah, nobody wants to read that, and it's got to be entertaining to read as well as to watch. You're telling the movie, and sometimes people are accused of overwriting, but not if it's fun. If it's 5 pages longer and fun than 5 pages shorter and deadly, that's a great question, because not enough people make scripts entertaining to read.
One of my first jobs was a story analyst. I was a script reader, and I did that for about 2 years. And so I'd have to read, no kidding, 10 scripts a week, which isn't too bad, but it's 2 scripts a day, and then you have to do the write-up and stuff like that. And so in that time of doing that, I read thousands of scripts, and I can tell you, there's 5 that were great. One was by Frank Darabont, and it was called Mine, which never got made, but it was really
from the Robert McCammon book.
Yeah, it's really excellent. And he, and so I mean, I guess that's a bad reference, because he's a really great writer, but so he's of course going to write really good prose, and is allowed to probably be a little bit more talky than other writers, but. You're reading a short story, and you need to be entertained by it. But at the same time, you can't go overkill. Like when you see that block, it's like you're not going to read it, because you're reading pretty fast. So if you're writing sort of a punchy style, like Shane Black, like he sort of like not started, but he would talk to the writer, talk to the reader.
Too. James Cameron's like the best. Terminator, and such a great script. Would you recommend to the film students to work as a reader? Because I worked as a reader for a couple of years too.
It'll
really pump you up, because you'll read so much shit. You'll be like, oh my God, I've got to go write.
My shit's better than this shit.
But you know what helped me was because you're reading like analytically, and so when you start writing, so you write a script, and there's like that thing that you're like, it's not that good, but you kind of forget about it, and you're like, oh, no one will notice. That's like the only thing the reader's going to notice is that thing. And so like when you're writing, you can kind of pick up on these bad habits that other people have had, and you're like, let's not do that because I've seen it too many times.
When you work does anybody work as a reader who's in film school, or is anybody doing that? Just one person?
Yeah.
Because
Painful, isn't it?
when you work as a reader, it forces you, there are categories you have to fill out. It forces you to come up with the log line.
Yeah.
What is the log line of the script? Oh my God. I mean, did you ever have like an impossible time figuring that out?
Yeah.
But it also makes you realize for your own work, what's my log line?
But I thought it helped, like for pitching and stuff like that, when people would say, just quickly, what's your story? And you could, and you're like, you could just rattle it off so quickly because for reading, you're reading for time. You want to get through this as quickly as possible. So it's like you're learning. It's definitely a skill, and you're learning to write analytically, which is
I would really recommend you guys do that. And I did it for free for Sundance for a year, and then I worked for a production company.
And when I was producing Masters of Horror, I was reading all these writers and submissions and all that stuff, and it's painful, if you're reading a bunch of stuff. It was, believe me, the worst part of being a producer is reading scripts that people submit. I mean, it's really tough to do, and if you can do something special, whether they buy that script or not, if you have a voice that entertains you all the way from page 1 to 100, you're way ahead of the pack, and that's a voice you want to develop, and you need to learn that way to be an entertainer without being too showy or too self-centered, but make you want to turn to the next page. Be surprising, be original, have a voice.
Reading good scripts helps as well. Like the ones that that are nominated every year for the Oscar are often helpful, just to see the style that people use for the prose and stuff like that. Like because you're watching. I'm trying to think. Like every once in a while you watch a movie and you're like, I wonder how that was written, like an action scene or whatever. And sometimes it's beneficial, sometimes it's not. But it's always interesting to watch a movie, then read the screenplay, and just see how it was done.
Yep.
Hey guys, you guys were talking a little bit a while back about the kind of self-contained, one location, 5 or 6 characters type of small horror film. I'm sure you guys have read and written some of those. What makes a really good one of that type of film?
Well, I think for me, just quick answer, where I'm not aware that I'm reading that kind of film, like where I'll think about later and go, damn, he tricked me again. That was 5 characters in one location with the thing where I'm subtly pulled in that way, but where I think for me where I feel like I saw interesting characters experience some kind of contained horror that feels freaky to me, or kind of
it's all about story,
under my skin. Yeah,
it's all about story, and you're right, not thinking about that, because I'm actually about to embark on producing a series of like $1 million movies with a lot of the directors who did Masters of Horror, and just we're trying to find that, and they are not easy to come by, because most of the spec scripts or ideas that people have that they develop on their own are bigger than that. And it's an opportunity to do that, and it's hard to find. I mean, I've written my own, but it's having
tricky
trouble
because it's such a well-worn tale that you need to be really unique in whatever the setup is, whatever the payoff is, so that you're reading it or you're watching it and you're like, I know exactly what this is, but it's different, somehow different. And just in doing that, now you're suddenly unique and you have a voice, because you know exactly. We know that this is going to be that movie, but oh no, it's not, because I'm going to do this different here. Yeah. So, and that's how.
Because on page 30, you just revealed the character who you thought was a certain person.
Yeah.
Turns out not to be that person, and now you're kind of twisting things around based on the containment.
But I just recently read The Stranger's script before I saw the movie, and I don't know if anybody's read that script, but
yeah, I have.
Boy, those first 30 minutes, you're like, what the hell is going on between this couple? And it's so intriguing. I mean, I really recommend you read the script. The movie didn't really deliver on that.
The movie was pretty good, but what was great about it was the relationship between those two characters were so rich that you don't find in a horror movie. Exactly. It was set up, and it starts out with these guys coming home from a wedding where one guy proposed to the woman and she didn't want to marry him. And it's like, that's not a horror movie setup, but it's a great setup. And that is a slow burn that really worked. That was a film that was hugely successful.
You can find that script online, read it. It's great.
Yeah, it's really good. Well, I think we got to wrap it up. Thank you, Patrick, Marcus, Juliet, Stiles. All right, thank you.